to Cooper Talk.
Welcome to Cooper Talk. I'm your host, Steve Cooper, and remember, I'm only as hip as my guests. I got to tell you something, people. I always love when I talk to people that the last time I talked to them was like 10 years ago, because back then I was still living in LA. I was dating Joanne. We weren't married, and then we moved back, and you lose touch with people, especially in the entertainment world and when you go across the country. And all of a sudden, one day I'm on Facebook, and I see, she may have been on before, I don't know. I remember the first time she was on my show, I followed her up on Twitter, but she popped up on Facebook, and I added her, and she accepted my friendship request. And the other night I said, you know what? She keeps writing about these books. I want to hear about the books. She has a UK editor, all this cool stuff. And so I reached out to her, and she said, oh, come on. And my guest is Michele Greene. How you doing, Michele?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm good. You know, it's crazy. I always say this with anyone in the entertainment business. You may not talk to someone for 10 years, but once you sit down and start talking to them, it's like, holy crap. It's like, I just talked to them yesterday.
Yeah. It is like that. I don't know. I think everybody's like, unless you just like totally change your life, right? And you do something like you move away and you run a lobster shack or something. You know, if you're still in the entertainment business in some way or some form, you're still in there. Like you're still in there swinging, you know, So
tell me about the writing career. I know, you have this new series coming out, or you've written a book and then you have a series, but you wrote something a while ago. But when I was talking to you, you weren't acting as much. I know you're very involved in the arts. I know you sing. I know you all do that. But tell me about the book writing, when you published your first novel, and then tell me about the new, what's the name? Cassidy Clarke. I want to hear about Cassidy Clarke.
Yes, there's the Cassidy Clarke series and the Emily Ray series. I wrote my first novel over 20 years ago, right? It was a young adult novel. They used to call it young adult. Now they call it new adult. But it was a young adult novel. It was set in LA. And that book did okay. It did, all right. It got really good reviews, and it was optioned like a million times to turn it into television series and movies. And actually we're talking to people right now about it again, after all these years. And then I wrote another one a couple of years later. That one was with Harper Collins. The second one was with Simon & Schuster. And, but again, young adult, a 15-year-old protagonist. And then I took this break. I took a break because sometimes life just kind of says you have to reorganize your life, right? And I've been working, of course, nonstop in TV, which is great, but that's unless you're on a series and you know your schedule, or you're a big movie star and everything goes around your schedule. For a working actor, you just never know what your day or your week or your month is going to be, right? You think you have everything planned, and then you get a job and you have to go out of state, or you have to go to Canada, and you're going to be gone for 2 weeks. So the managing of your life, I was fine doing that for years when I was, just me floating around. But once I adopted my son and he was a baby, you suddenly, and I'm a single mother because I adopted him as a single parent, suddenly you're like, oh, I can't do that. I can't not have any idea what my schedule is going to be. And my son also was, he had lived in 5 different places by the time he was 2 years old. So he came home to me for good right before his 2nd birthday. And so the idea you have that you're going to have like a nanny and you're going to keep working and you're going to have this fabulous life, you suddenly realize this little boy has had so much insecurity and so much change in these 2 pivotal years of his life. Now, the next 3 or 4 are going to be very pivotal. And it can't be, mommy's here. Oh, tomorrow mommy's getting on a plane. Oh, mommy will be back in 3 weeks. Oh, we're going to Canada for 3 weeks. So you're not going to go to your preschool, and you're not going to, you just have to, for me anyway, I was like, well, this is it. I have to be the one. It has to be me. It has to be me who takes him to preschool, me who picks him up. Me who takes him to elementary school, me who picks him up. He needed the stability of the same person every day, And then at the same time, my mother's health took an enormous downward turn, and she was always, very, very much, I was, very kind of responsible for her for decades, So suddenly you're in that sandwich where you have a small child in school and you have an elderly parent. They both need like all your attention. Taking care of one of them is a full-time job, and now you have like a full-time job with 2 people, and then you have this real full-time job that means you get up and leave town all the time. Right. So I just was like, I have to stop. And I stepped back. I moved out of LA. I live about an hour from LA right now. And I just changed my life, right? And I took a break from working as an actress. And I had all these books floating around in my head and all these ideas, but you just don't have time. You don't have the mental space to sit down and write a book when you're like, we've got to get grandma to the cardiologist, right, and then you've got to get to soccer, and then it's bath time, you know. So my mom passed away in 2022. My son is now a teenager. He's actually starting college in September. He was independent and driving, and suddenly I thought, well, I can sit down and write these books. And I had taken a huge break, you know, but I have a great book agent, and I sent her one manuscript, and she was like, okay, I love it. Let's go out with it. And we sold that book to my UK publisher, which is Storm Publishing. And we sold it. I wrote it as a standalone book, and they bought it as a series. So I just finished the fourth book, the first draft of the fourth book about a week ago.
Now, when you wrote this book and you wrote these books, were they from stories that you had been? You said a lot of stories were popping around in your head. Were they from stories that you had popping around your head, or did all of a sudden, from those stories popping around in your head, these stories came out because you may have thought, oh, those stories are a little bit older. I want something more fresh. Where did these ideas come from?
This idea. I have these two book series. One is called the Emily Ray book series, and that's the one that's publishers in the UK. The protagonist is an FBI agent who's in her late 30s, who's a kidnapping survivor and has like very complex PTSD. And she's great at her job, but her life is a little tightly wound. The other book series is with Thomas and Mercer here in the US, and that features a very young woman who's in her early 20s, who's a new cop in the LAPD. And the Emily Ray series, I had that idea in my head for a long time. And I didn't really have to change it much. I just sort of had it bouncing around, you know. But the Cassidy Clarke series, just thought, wait a minute, maybe I'm going to do this one about this young cop who's really idealistic and goes into the LAPD thinking that she's going to be part of like the new face of the LAPD, because you know, the LAPD is like a paramilitary force, right? So they're always like, we're adjusting. We're having more community-based policing. You want to go right because you're tired. People have complained about you shooting people too much, right? So she goes in with this idea that she's going to be very, you know, part of the new face of the department. And her father is kind of a problematic homicide detective who's always been the guy who broke the rules and crossed the lines. And one of those guys who's like the kind of guys who say things like, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission. Right. You know what I mean? Like that kind of guy, right? And he's being forced into retirement because he's just old now. And they're like, you got to go. So it's got this balance between her dad, who's like very old school, who she's very close to, and she comes in with all this idealism. And then, of course, she butts up right against all this crazy corruption and the machinations and the jockeying for position. And but that one really just sprang into my head back like 2 years ago. It's just like one day I was like walking the dog and I thought, oh, I like that idea. And then we sold that one. And so what ended up happening was I got the Emily Ray book series, which I was thrilled about, like in April. And then by June, I had the other one. I had both. And then suddenly I had all these deadlines, right? I had all these deadlines. And publishers have everybody lined up. They have the copy editor lined up. They have the proofreader lined up. They have everything lined up. And you have to meet all these deadlines, and you end up getting behind on them, and you're late, and you're pressured. And it was a long year and a half.
Now, when they give you deadlines, is it a deadline for draft one, or deadline for draft two, deadline for final copy? Or do you give them, let's say, draft one, draft two, draft three, and then give you notes, and they go, we're taking it into final copy? What is the process? Because I know in screenwriting, you know, it can be quick, but it can be also really long. So what's your process?
The process in books is generally, you send in the manuscript, your first draft. They send you a letter. It's the structural letter in which they address the structural issues with the story. And the editor says, I think we need to think about this. Maybe, do we need this character? Can we consolidate this? Can we, you know what I mean? Can we focus more on this character. So you then incorporate those notes. And if you really don't agree with them, obviously you have conversations with them and go, no, I really want to keep that for this reason. And my editors are wonderful. Both of my editors at both houses are great. And then you send it in after you've adjusted it. And you hope that they like that version. And if they want more tweaks to it, they send you another pass and they go, no, think about this, this, and this. And then and then it's like the line edit where you go through like literally paragraph by paragraph. Then it goes back to them. Then they send you a copy edited version with a copy editor who goes through the entire thing to make sure that all the punctuation is right, all the references are correct. You mentioned this person in chapter 3, they show up again in chapter 10. Is this different about them? Things like that. And then you go through that one, you do the copy edit, send it back, then they send it back to you again a couple weeks later for the proofread, and then you go through the proofread, and sometimes the proofreader will be someone because the Emily Ray book series is in the UK, everybody's in the UK, like the proofreader will be like a British guy who doesn't understand American colloquialisms, right? And like at one point, a character says, I'm taking the dog out to do his business. And the proofreader will say, what does this mean? What does this mean in the United States? And I'm like, it means, you send back a note, it means the dog's going out to go to the bathroom. Oh, we call it. I said, yes, but it doesn't take place in the UK. It takes place in the US. So there's all kinds of little things like that. And then you'll get another pass at it. You look at it again, and that's for the audiobook, because they want to make sure that the actor who's reading it has the right pronunciations of everything. Because in my books, there are always people that have like Latino last names. There are always some characters who speak Spanish. So they want to make sure that they have all of that correct.
So FBI, LAPD,
right.
Do you have any past connection to law enforcement? Besides, I know you play a lawyer on TV, but I'm just wondering because a lot of times people write something they know. Do you have any connection to that, or why do you think you picked those? Why do you think you picked those two?
Well, I think I was invited to speak at the FBI years ago about arts programs with at-risk youth, because I have this program that I do when I have time. I do it with different underserved communities or with kids who live in areas where there's like a lot of gang violence. They're writing programs, theater programs, and I really enjoy doing that. So this was back when my first young adult book came out, and they invited me to come and talk at the FBI. I mean, honestly, Steve, I got a phone call that said, I'm so-and-so from the FBI. And I thought, I haven't done anything. What do they think I've done? I'm like, am I dating someone who's done something? What's happened, And they were like, no, we want you to come and talk. So I went and spoke, and I met a whole bunch of FBI agents that day, right? No, and I didn't become like buddies with them or anything. But I ended up taking this thing because I knew I had this FBI character and this story in my head. I took this thing called the FBI Citizens Academy that you apply to, and they let you come. I guess they accept about, 30 people or something every year. And you go for 9 weeks, 9 Thursday evenings, to the FBI building in Westwood, and you sit with all these different FBI people come in. And so the guys from the bomb squad come in, and then the polygraph guys come in, or women as well. There's a lot of female agents as well. And then the gang agents come in, and the counterterrorism agents come in, and they all talk about what their divisions do, how they work. They give examples of cases that have already been adjudicated and gone to court, because they obviously can't talk about things that haven't. But it's very sort of weirdly intense, right? Because when you're there, you realize like how incredibly buttoned down and stiff the FBI is. Like, they're really stiff. I remember the guy who did the polygraph presentation came in, and people were asking questions like, well, what if the machine doesn't read it correctly, or what if the machine makes a mistake? And the guy had like this totally flat delivery, and he just looked at everybody and said, the machine never makes a mistake. So I did that, and that gave me sort of a view into the FBI more. And I did that really as research, right?
No, okay, so you did it as research. So you didn't really go back and research the FBI when you started. It's because you sort of had a crash course on what the FBI was doing.
Yeah, I had my crash course, and it was really, really quite interesting. And then there were a couple FBI agents that I remained like in casual contact with. So I would call them up sometimes and say, look, and you take a lot of dramatic license when you're writing a book about law enforcement, because you can't really show what anybody does, especially the feds. You can't really show what they do, So, and part of the sort of what happens with these protagonists in this genre of book is there always has to come a moment in the book when they really like break the rules a bit, when they push the boundaries and they do what they're not supposed to do to solve the case, It's kind of a norm, because if your characters had to do every single thing by the book, it would take forever.
Right.
It would take forever. And it has to happen in the course of a 300-page book,
So how about the LAPD? Now you're going into that, and and funny thing is, LAPD is one of those police departments that's always under scrutiny, like you said earlier, because there's always been so much going on. I mean, when I lived in LA, and I used to say the one thing I really do miss, and this always cracked me up, and because my wife Joanne had lived out in LA with me for 3 years, and we moved back here to New Jersey, but I really miss when you watch like Channel 5 or Channel 9, you see the police chases. And they're always the car would be going really slow. And you see sometimes the real polite driver who would stop at a stop sign. He was eluding the police. Right. And so the police were always in your eyes and always on the news. So when you sit down to write, and also because you live in LA, even, how did you get your research done? And did you worry if you show someone in a bad view, you might get a knock on your door going, hello, Ms. Greene, we don't...
I knew a couple of people who were police officers, which is sort of weird. One was a very weird guy, a very weird guy. So that was not someone you wanted to know much. But the LAPD has a mythology about them, they really do. And they really are sort of like a paramilitary force. They're all super fit, and they always look like we're ready for combat. But if you grew up in LA like I did, the LAPD has had an incredibly troubled history. And most police departments probably do to some degree, right? But we had the whole thing that happened with the Rampart Division, when that became a national scandal and all those cops were planting guns on people and shooting people and stealing drugs from evidence lockers. And there was that one guy who went down for it, but there were a whole cabal of them, right? And you see this all the time, though. You'll see some weird sheriff's department in some big city. They're all oath keepers or something, right? And so there's always this weird undercurrent in the LAPD, and I think in all police departments, but especially in the LAPD, there's this weird undercurrent of there's the ones who are good, and then there are the ones who are bad, and then there are the ones who are kind of in the middle. Right. And how can you remain a good one if you have to work with the bad ones, right? So I really kind of wanted my protagonist in this, who's very young. Her name is Cassidy Clarke, and she's in her early 20s, and she has a certain amount of stuff she has to deal with because her dad is this very sort of famous homicide detective who's retired now. So she gets a lot of shit from people, his legacy kind of hangs over her, right? And she's you can see a young woman who you can see is going to become a detective because she thinks like a detective and she wants to move like a detective because that's what she's known growing up, But she really starts to see there's certain players in it who are not good people. There's certain players in it who do things that are really underhanded and really unfair. And then there's one character who's nuts, who's a cop, and he's nuts. And he becomes the B-story villain. Because, I always write these books. I like to have the main thrust of the story, but I like to always have a B story, I like to have some other thing going on, whether it's in the character's personal life or something going on that's related usually to the main 2 or 3 characters of some other aspect of it. And I think that's kind of just a cinematic sort of thing that I like because of my background as an actress,
Well, you have the background as an actress. So when you write this book, and I'm sure, and you can say you haven't thought about it, but I'm sure you have, when they talk to you about possibly movie rights, is there anyone in mind that you would like to see to play this the young lady, the young police officer.
Yes.
Like when you wrote it, is there someone you
Yes.
go, I want this person? Who is
She's
it?
great. You know who I think should play that character? I don't remember. I think I'm getting her name right. You know that she's on Stranger Things, right? She's the redhead on Stranger Things. I think her name is. I'm thinking of somebody else who's got a really similar name. I think her name is Sadie. Oh heck! If I could look it up on my computer, if I had it with me. Oh, I'm blanked on her name. She plays the character of Maxine on Stranger Things.
I'm looking it up. Hold on. So okay, so why is it something? Why do you?
Because she's an actress. She's an actress who I think now is probably about 23, and she's been playing a teenager. You know, she played a teenager on Stranger Things all these years. I think her name is Sadie. She has like a one-syllable last name. I'm an idiot for not knowing it. And she's a very good actress. Very, very good actress.
Madeline Klein?
No, she plays a character named Madeline.
Okay, so we got it. It's it's who? I don't know. I don't know. I looked up the wrong one. I have a Madeline Klein, but she's not. Okay, anyway. So Sadie from Stranger Things. Okay, keep going. I'm sorry.
Her last name is like a one-syllable. It's alliteration. It's S and S.
Sadie Sink.
Sadie Sink. Right. Sorry, I apologize to her. She's a wonderful actress. I'm just tired today, and I'm running around in the 100-degree heat. She's a wonderful actress. And she's now about, I think, 23. And I feel sort of like, I know what that is. I know what it is to be an actress that age, and you've been playing teenagers. And you want to make that transition to playing more grown-up characters, right? And not necessarily college kids, because that's sort of a continuation of high school, you know. And I just think she's wonderful, and I think she'd be so great in this. I would love to get it set up as a series. I had a lot of interest in it. Last year we had a couple different companies that were interested in it, and for various reasons, it got to a certain point, and then it didn't move forward. I think some of it had to do with we had certain writers attached and whatnot, and I think I have a book rights representative at MGMT, and we're sending it out now to other people. But I have to send her an email this week and say, find out who Sadie Singh's managers are and send it to her, because she's such a wonderful actress. She's wonderful, and it's she's still a young character. The character's like 24, but it's a meaty sort of character. She's got a lot going on. So you mentioned earlier about the at risk youth, and tell me about that program, because when I lived in L.A., there was an actor named Robert Prosky, and he used to get. I know about Prosky.
But he would get. I went to one of his shows once after he did Cooper Talk in Burbank. He would get guys he would go to prisons or people just got out, and he'd give them acting lessons, and these guys would tell their stories but act them out, and it was fascinating to me. I went into North Hollywood and saw it, and it really moved me. I was like, this is something. Tell me about the work you're doing.
Well, my program, I had started it in LA, working with different groups of in different sort of neighborhoods, right, or through different organizations, and then I did some work with adults in the last 6 or 7 years. And I just think that, honestly, I think people who don't even want to be actors should take acting classes. I think people who don't want to be actors should get up and do plays sometimes, And what I really like is I like the idea of people in underserved communities, or especially kids, at-risk kids, like teenagers, finding a way to incorporate. I always want to do like a / acting and writing program with them, because the acting part of it is fun. And a lot of it is role playing, and you get to sort of, I think it was Angelina Jolie, I'm paraphrasing this. She said something about how acting was a great outlet when you have a lot of emotional turmoil in your life or below the surface of your life. And it is. It's a fabulous place to put all that. And I think that for kids who are going through rough times, it could be pretty fabulous to be able to have a safe place to put all of those emotions. And you do it through improv, you do it through scene work, you do it through, a lot of times I like to write like an original play that's sort of based on the people in the group. So you give the people in the group a chance to play a character that allows them to sort of work out some of their stuff. But I also really like especially young people, I like for them to write. I like for them to write their own monologues. I want them to write from the perspective, like about their life, but from the perspective of somebody else. You know, I always say, like, if you were writing about your problems, but you're not you, right? When it's you, you feel like you're in like the spin cycle of the washing machine. But say you're writing about how a character like you would solve their problem. And it's amazing how just that little bit of artistic separation, people can see something in a totally different way. And a lot of it really has to do with how you frame your experiences. You know, do you look at them like, I had this shitty, horrible family and they made me miserable? Or do you look at that as they were like the pressure chamber that turned me into a diamond instead of a piece of coal? You know what I mean? Was that pressure, did that help me develop resilience? Did that help me develop flexibility? Did that help me develop perspective that I might not have developed otherwise? So a lot of it has to do with reframing. And I do it like through writing and storytelling, reframing your own experience, right? In a way that makes it more manageable or makes it more processable. You know what I mean? And you don't feel as caught in it because it gives you an outlet, an artistic outlet. And I really do believe that's the whole purpose of the arts, right? It's not just like entertainment. There's a social function that the arts play, which are to help us understand the human experience.
Now, what made you go into acting? As a kid, did you act? I mean, what was the driving force? Because every actor has different stories.
I'm definitely not one of those actors who likes to be the center of attention. I'm not one of those actors who was like the class clown and wanted everybody to look at me at all. I was like pathologically shy as a child. I had an older brother who is now an academic, but my older brother got into drama when he was in high school. And he was like most kids in drama. You know, he was cute, he had fun. My brother was never going to be an actor, right? My brother was never going to be an actor. But he had fun doing it, and it looked like fun to me. You know, I was 4 years behind him, and I would go see his plays, and it looked really fun. So I thought, maybe I'll get into that too. I'll try that too. And my brother was kind of a snark, and my brother said to me once when I was in, I don't know, middle school, he said, I just want you to know you're never going to get a lead role, okay? You're just going to be in the chorus, all right? Just so you don't get some idea that you're going to get a lead role in something. And I was like, 12. I was like, okay, whatever, fine. And then I started getting into drama in junior high school. By the time I got to high school, I was actually good at it, right? It wasn't just like an extracurricular activity. I was quite good at it. And I was in that small group of kids that in every school you go, oh, wait, well, that one's good. That they might go on and do something, right? And there's always kids like that in high school, Several years, I mean, three years ahead of me was like Kevin Spacey and Mayor Winningham at Chatsworth. And we all would go to drama festivals together, and we'd be like, oh, yeah, those two are really good. And you'd see them at the drama festival at Birmingham High School or whatever. And so I sort of started, and it was interesting. At that time, I started to really think about acting as a storytelling medium. And I really enjoyed the idea that you could get up and pretend to be somebody else. And you could tell a story about an experience that you had never had, but you could find the resonant moments in it and make it real to an audience. I love that. I just love that. But I liked it from kind of an artistic perspective, as opposed to a look at me.
Right.
And that was how I got into it. And I auditioned for an audition-only program at USC that was like a conservatory program, and I got into it, and they only took 20 kids a year, and I got into that program on scholarship, and, I went to classical theater training for 4 years. And I just started working.
So when, I mean, I look at your IMDb and, it's like you did some roles on 8 is Enough. I mean, what was it like for you to audition? Because, a lot of times when you go to, this is what I hear when you go to college for acting or even acting classes. They teach you what they should do. They teach you how to act. They don't really teach you how to audition. They really don't teach you what it's like when you get on that TV set for the first time where there's blocking.
Right.
So when you graduated, when did you start getting work? And did you find an agent?
I started working. I was very, very fortunate. I got an agent right when I got out of high school because a guy who had been in drama, very talented guy who had been in drama with my brother, who was actually older than my brother. And he would come back and do plays at my high school, and he wrote a lot of plays and one-act plays. And his name was Stuart K. Robinson. And he's now the CEO of my agency that I'm with, my theatrical agency. I've known him for many, many years. And he introduced me to the woman who was his agent at the time. And she was this like tough old broad in the valley, in the San Fernando Valley, like chain smoking with her book of actors' photos. And she took me on. And I know this sounds like insane, right? The first audition I went on was for a television pilot. And I got that job. And I was 17 and I had been out of high school 3 weeks. And I didn't realize when I signed that contract that if it had gone, I would have been under contract for like 5 years, right? And I would not have been able to go to college. So luckily the show was a failure. It was a dismal, horrible failure. But it was my first job, and it got me into SAG, and I made like 5 cents, and I worked with some really great old school TV writers on that show. They wrote for I Love Lucy, for God's sake, and Bob Carroll and Madeline Pugh. And then I started doing guest shots, right? I did like Laverne and Shirley. I think that was my second job. And then I got on 8 is Enough, and they turned me into a recurring character. And I was by the time I did 8 is Enough, playing a high schooler, I was already in college. I'd already started college. And I just told my agent, I don't want to do a pilot or anything that will require me to drop out of school because I want to finish my degree in 4 years. And she went sort of ballistic, and I said, I'm sorry, that's the boundary, and I'm not dropping out of school because I'm not really very good, like I'm good like as a high school actress, but I don't know what the hell I'm doing, and I need proper training to know how to do this. And so she went kind of ballistic. My mom went kind of ballistic because my mom just wanted me to work. So I was like, but I was pretty tough. I held the line, and I was like, I don't care how much y'all yell and scream, I'm not dropping out of college. And I worked the whole time I was in school, but I would do like a TV movie or a guest shot on a TV show, and I'd scramble to make up the work that I missed in college. But I graduated on time, and I graduated with my degree. And then a few weeks after I got out of college, I got a Steve Bochco series called Bay City Blues. That was supposed to be a big hit and was a big failure.
How does that affect you psychologically? I mean, you just got out of college and you've been working, so it's not like it's your first job. But once again, when you're young, and they're saying it's going to be a big hit, and you sit there and you go, "Oh, baby, Steven Bochco, all right." How do you? Did it throw you for a loop? Did it mess you up for a while?
Oh, it really, I don't know, it really hit me because the show was good, and it had very good writers. It had very good actors, and it wasn't like a smash out of the gate hit like LA Law was. LA Law was a hit immediately, but Bay City Blues wasn't. And I think Steven just got so butthurt that it wasn't like a massive hit right away. He just pulled it. And instead of had like a commitment of like 12 episodes or something, right? Because he was a very powerful producer. They could have just left it on the air. And he pulled it because, his ego was out of joint that it wasn't a massive smash hit. And we were just devastated. We were just all like, from one day to the next, it was over. And it was Ken Olin, Sharon Stone, Patrick Cassidy, Perry Lang, Dennis France. There were a whole bunch of us on this show, and we were like, what? What happened? Literally, what happened? And as I was, I loved my character on that show. And I was like just thrown that the life of a show could be ended that way. You know what I mean? In such a way that, I don't mean to say this in a bad way, but in a way that seemed so petty. You know what I mean? It was so petty. Like, my God, it's such a good show. Let it run for 2 months, Because in those days, you could run for a season if you were a powerful producer, And he was really powerful. So that was very shocking to me. And then about 3 years later, LA Law came around.
How did you have to audition for it? Tell me your path into LA Law. What happened with
No,
that?
I knew Steven. Steven and I were friends and had been friends, since the basically Blues days. And we socialized with a lot of the same people. And he called me up and asked me if I wanted to play this character of this young law clerk who becomes a lawyer. And I read the script and I thought it was great. And I was like, absolutely, I want to do that. And I got an offer to do another series the same week that they called my agent about LA Law. I got an offer to do basically the female role on a series that was kind of like a father-daughter show. That was a big hit. That became a big hit. But I said no to that and yes to LA Law.
Well, real quick, I want to talk about LA Law more, but earlier you had said with Sadie Sink that you know what it's like to go from a teenager to, so how did you break that? How did you do that? Was it, as you said, you were in college when you're getting these roles, but how did you establish yourself as a talent that could pull that off?
Well, when I was in college, I played teenagers the entire time, right? I played teenage runaways. I played teenage drug addicts. I did this ridiculously bad movie with Helen Hunt where we both played like teenagers in high school who smoked weed and jumped out a window. It was like crazy. I think Helen Hunt smokes a joint and jumps out a window. It was like so crazy. But literally the job I did right before LA Law, right before it, I played a teenager. But that's a hard transition to make because I was starting to feel it as an actress because you can still pull off I was 24. You can still pull off teenage roles if you look young and you're small, like I was. But emotionally, you're not really in that spot, right? You have a little more life experience. You have some education. You know more about the world, and you don't seem so much like a teenager, right? And I remember going through this period that was a little bit rough, and my agent was like, well, they thought you were really good and you looked great for the role, but they said you seemed too grown up, right? So it's a strange transitional point. There's several different ones in your career as an actress that you go through. And the first one is how do I go from playing teenagers to playing young leading ladies, ingenues? And luckily LA Law sort of took me into that territory. The bad thing about LA Law was that people thought that I was 10 or 12 years older than I was because I had the big hair and I had the business suit and I worked in a law firm. And the character wasn't written. Actually, the character was written that you knew she was a young mother but she was a lot younger than a lot of the other characters. But in the sort of industry perception was like, oh, I must be in my late 30s. And I was 24. So when I left LA Law, that became a big hurdle to overcome because I was 30 and people thought I was 43.
Now, LA Law, it's funny, I still remember my mom loved that show. She would watch it. She said, So when you get in it, you said it was a hit right out of the gate. I mean, when was it, because this was it was a long time ago, so I forget a lot of stuff.
Oh, it was a long time ago,
So what happened? Did it hit the ratings real quick?
It had great ratings right out of the gate. It got great reviews. Like, the next day, like it aired and the numbers were really high and the reviews were spectacular. So right out of the gate, it was like, hooray, and it became, this was pre-internet, right? It became that kind of thing where it was like, what do they used to call it? Must-see TV, right? You had to be home on Thursday night at 10 o'clock to see what happened on LA Law. It got the best night of the week, the best time slot on the best night of the week. And, the network threw everything at it because they were thrilled with it. And it just went on to win like so many Emmys and People's Choice and Golden Globe Awards. And it just became like this, like, thing, right? It just became like this sort of big explosive success. And very quickly. So
how do you adapt to that? Because, once again, you said it was must TV. And back then, if their TV was if a TV wasn't a hit, it was getting a ton of viewers. When it's a hit, everybody, as you said, everybody's watching it. As we say, we do miss the day when there used to be water cooler talk. Now everyone streams. Right. It was like, oh, did you see what happened last? What happened? So how does that affect you? Because now this is your first adult role, but now people know you. They're going to recognize you because everybody's watching it. I mean, did your life change drastically, or did it take a while to people recognize?
No. I mean, part of it was that I was never a person. Some people love the idea of celebrity, right? And some people really embrace the idea of celebrity the moment that door cracks open a little bit for them, right? And that's never been me, right? The show was a huge hit. I never really paid that much attention to the fact that it was a huge hit. I would go places. I suppose I'd go to Target or something. I suppose maybe people recognize me, but I never paid any attention to it. Some people would come up to you, but in LA, people are extremely blasé. Nobody comes up to you in Los Angeles. Nobody. If you go to other states and other cities or other countries, people come up to you and go, "Oh, I love your show." In LA, everybody is like so cool. They don't want to act like they watch you in anything. But you definitely would have. I just never paid attention to it, Steve. I like the work itself. I like showing up to work. I love being on the set. I loved working with all the actors. They were wonderful. We had great writers. We had great directors. The work process was so much fun. And it's fun to go to awards shows. It's fun to do all of that and magazine interviews and the rest of it. But was never a person who invested a lot in my own idea of celebrity for me. I just was not that person. I just wanted to live my life the way I'd always lived my life. And I was a supporting character as well. So, and because I say the internet didn't exist then, so fame was not like this juggernaut that it is now, where it can just like take on a life cycle of its own. You had to like really go out and pursue a lot of that back then if you wanted it. And I had a publicist and I would do a certain amount of it, but I was never a person who had like an idea of my persona, at all. I just wanted to live my life. I wanted to go to the gym. I wanted to walk my dog. I wanted to hang out with my boyfriend, go to the beach,
So how does it also feel when you're getting picked up, when you know that income's going to be there? Because that's the whole thing, as you say, with actors, You never know. You can have as you said, as you got older and you had the son and your mom, you're like, I have to live this life. But back then, what is that like? Are you sleeping good at night because because how this.
You can buy a house. You can go in and buy a new car tomorrow if you want to. You don't have to worry about, I think I want to go on a vacation this summer. You know what I mean? You don't have to budget for anything. You're making very good money, and you don't have to stress about that. You know what I mean? That's one thing you just don't have to worry about. But you do feel like, I remember feeling like when hiatus would come around, you wanted to make sure you were taking steps to expand your career beyond LA Law. So you try to say, you'd end up doing TV movies. I had, to be quite honest, I had really horrible agents, right? I'd left my original agent, which I regretted. She was wonderful, and I never should have left her. I was an idiot. And I went to these bigger agencies, and I had some of the worst damn agents you've ever seen in your life. And I was on a huge show, and they were so damn lazy, they wouldn't do anything. And all they would do is try and plug you into some TV movie with your own network. And you'd say, well, look, back in those days, there were independent films, unlike now. And there were festival films. And I would say to them, look, I want to do some roles. I want to try and do, I'm on this huge series. I can probably get a cool, interesting role, small role even, in a festival film or in an indie film. It can't be that those doors are completely closed. They should be open because I'm on a huge show. And they just wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it. I had this guy who's the head of a very big agency now. Very big agency. Big player in Hollywood. He was the worst damn agent I ever had in my life. It was before he expanded his agency into like a huge monster. And I remember he said to me, well, I don't know. I just figure you should do what's the easy thing, And the easy thing is to get you into a TV movie on NBC. And I said, yeah, but what about a role like such and such or a role like this? Oh, but that's not how they think of you. I'm like, yeah, but you're my agent. Isn't it your job to like help me get outside of that box? No, I couldn't be the laziest asshole in the world. The laziest jerk, right? Oh, God. And So you look back and you go, wow. And I had a whole series of ones like that. You know, you're on a series and they just think they're not going to have to do anything. They're just going to do the minimum, right? So if you have a vision, like I had a sort of vision of the kind of things I wanted to do, and I was very unhappy in that regard, not on a series, but I was unhappy in the development of the other aspects that were going to happen beyond LA Law, because I really wanted to lay a certain foundation to work in a certain way. And I had these lazy jerks who wouldn't do anything.
So what happened with LA Law? How long were you on it?
5 years.
And that ran for how long?
8 years, but I left after 5.
So what happened? Was it you just said, I'm tired of it, or is it the old, I hear stories all the time. What happened?
No, I'm going to just tell the truth of what happened. I was on that show. At the end of the 5th season, they made my character a partner in the law firm. David Kelly, who was the main writing producer at that point, and Steven was kind of in the background. He was still involved, but he was kind of in the background. They were both leaving. They were just moving on to other projects. David had his own deal. And they had like a big upheaval of writers and producers. And there was a guy on that show who had been like a supervising producer, and he'd been sort of moving up through the ranks. And I'd known him as sort of a supervising entry-level producer for a long time. I'd worked with him on Bay City Blues. And he was like a nasty jerk. He was just a jerk. And he decided somewhere in the last season of the show, he was just this impossible man, right? And he developed all this animosity towards me. He also had a bunch of animosity towards Harry. There were a number of actors that he just didn't like, and he would do everything he could every week to make you miserable. Like, he'd do everything he could to interfere with your work. You'd like be shooting a scene, you'd be halfway through it, and he'd come down to the set and say things like, I don't like the jacket Michelle is wearing. Let's change it. Which meant reshooting the whole damn scene, right? Because you've been in and out of shot. Arbitrary, like stupid power plays, And I went to David Kelly and I said, you're going to have to say something to him because he's really troublesome. He's constantly coming down to the set and causing problems. And he makes this huge thing about like my hairstyle or the jacket I'm wearing. It's petty. It makes no sense. It's disruptive. So David spoke to him, right? And he stopped. But once David left the show, that guy was like, we're getting rid of Michelle. Because he was mad. He was mad that I spoke up about him, right? Harry was already leaving. Jimmy was already leaving. And as I knew, we ended the 5th season with my character becoming a partner, and then I got a call a month later, no, they're not going to pick up your option. And it was completely this guy. It was this one guy. Because he was just an angry jerk, Yeah. And he saw me 5 or 6 years later at some event, and he came up to me and he was like, I have to apologize. I'm so sorry for what I did. I'm so sorry for what I did to you on the show. It was completely me. I was going through a horrible time in my life, and I wanted to go out. Do you feel like giving me that like $3 million that you cost me? How about that, buddy? But it was very sudden and very unexpected. And then, you have a publicist and you have to try and figure out how to spin it. Like now I'll just say what happened. But at the time you have to like spin it, And he was just a jerk. He was just a jerk who hated certain actors. And, he was, and I think part of it was that I'd known him since before he was like an executive. And he hated that, Just a petty jerk. And he went on, he probably works on tons of TV shows now, but, he could kiss my ass as far as I'm concerned. But but yeah, that was it. It was totally like a guy who was mad at you for speaking up about how disruptive he was.
So you get off the show, they spin it. So now, is the iron still hot? Because, you've been Emmy nominated. You're on a hit show. Do people say, we want Michelle? What happens when you leave that show?
Well, I left the show, and I wasn't, at that time, I really didn't want to I was still holding on to this idea that I would have a different type of career, that I would do interesting indie films, and that I would kind of and I was doing a lot of writing, and I kind of wanted to move into writing and producing as well. That was an era where that was just so impossible, like, for actresses. That was, like, they just wouldn't take you seriously as a writer back then if you were a TV actress. So I was trying to, like, sort of expand. I was trying to develop projects. But it was really hard. It was very hard because I came off of that show. People thought I was in my early 40s. I was 30 years old. I looked about 25. But I would get these auditions to play women that were 20 years older than I was, 15 years older than I was. And I'd say to my agent, the bad one, why am I going in for this? Well, that's the easy audition to get. I said, okay, it doesn't matter that it's the easy audition to get. If they think I'm 43 and I'm 30 and I look 27, I'm not going to get that job, right? So why are we sending me in for that? But that's the easy audition to get. And I went through this period that was really difficult. I did TV movies. I did a whole bunch of TV movies in that time, but it could have been me. It could have been anyone. You know what I mean? It wasn't like specific to me. I was like sort of a hot commodity who'd been on a series. So let's put her in these Women in Jeopardy movies. And, I did a lot of them. And, I made decent living. But I was very frustrated because I really had like this vision that I wanted to do certain kinds of projects. And I just wasn't even getting in the door. And a lot of it was part of it was the fallout of LA Law, people thinking I was a lot older than I was, because it's hard enough for a female actress. I mean, an actress when you are 43, right? But it's really hard when you're 30 and they think you're 43. So it was hard. And I was always I was doing a lot of writing, doing a lot of stuff, but it was very frustrating. I wasn't working as much as I wanted, wasn't working on the kind of stuff I wanted to work on. Changed agents a number of times in hopes of finding like representatives who like understood what I wanted. And I just went from one that was bad to another one that was worse to another one that was worse. And it was really hard. It was really hard. It really made me feel like, I look back on it now and I think I was so miserably unhappy, but I didn't want to face how unhappy I was. So I was just running as fast as I could, being super busy,
I want to ask you something about TV now, because even when you left, you did Cold Case, which is a show I love. You did a lot of episodes.
Oh, I love Cold Case. Yeah.
And now I was talking to my wife the other night, and the ABC schedule came out, and there's only 2 sitcoms, and there's like 5 episodics. Then the rest is like, well, Monday Night Football, Saturday Night Football, Celebrity Jeopardy, Celebrity Wheel of Fortune, 2-hour dancing with the stars. For someone from you who came from like the heyday, like you said, must-see TV, LA Law, and then you look at, you did The Unit, you did Cold Case, you did Bones, you did CSI, you did these shows that were, you guessed on them. What, as an actor, what do you think when you look and you see, holy crap, it's like bare bones for actors and writers? I mean, what's your thought? Because
it's really hard. It's become really difficult. I mean, because even, with the arrival of the streamers, right, when you ended up with Netflix and Hulu and Amazon and Google and all the other streaming networks, there was suddenly like a lot more work and a lot more initially like varied kinds of stories and stories that could be told in sort of different ways and limited series and whatnot. But it's a very rough environment for actors and for writers, because everything now there's like there's so much. Initially, when the streamers arrived, they went crazy and they just threw tons of money at everybody. And they put like 700 projects on every year. There's like tons of stuff. But they've realized that model is very hard to make money on, right? Delivering the entire series in one dump is hard to make advertising money on, right? So then they sort of had to dial back and figure out how we're going to do it. And then the shows become more and more derivative and more alike and more similar. But this glut of crazy, like, well, the whole reality TV began, it just started wiping out whole nights of what used to be scripted programming just becomes like, People Living on an Island or The Real Housewives of Timbuktu, or, you know what I mean? And there is a market for that, and it's cheaper to do, and it doesn't require writers, it doesn't require like so many of the things that are needed for scripted television. So the industry has changed so radically, like so much. And then there's also just the financial end of it. Movies now, I mean, I don't even see like independent movies. Now they're all like Marvel movies, right? Everything's about a superhero. And you have these giant budgets, and the main actors are making $30 million, and they're paying everybody else scale, and they're doing that in TV as well. Where you're, say, like a supporting character on a TV show, they want to pay you scale. They want to pay you scale. They don't want to guarantee you episodes. It's this cutting back of the entire industry has made it very hard for working actors, very hard for writers, especially young up and coming like TV writers. It's a very hard world now. And I don't know when or if that model is ever going to change. But having come from the era I came from, when series had 22 episodes, it's like, they're like dinosaurs, right? and it's just a totally different world, and you have to roll with it, and you have to adjust, and you have to. I'm really happy that all these books took off, because that's another aspect of my career that I'm very happy with and I'm very fulfilled by and I enjoy doing. So I'm just starting to step back into acting. I'm starting to go on auditions again. I'm starting to get back out there. But it's a totally different world than it was,
Now, how do you want your book? I mean, you said, of course, you want your book, you said it was a series, but would you want it as a network series or a streaming series, or what would you want?
I would honestly, I think both of those book series that I have could be really good television series. I really do. I think they could be, both of them, as an open-ended series, not like a limited 6-episode or something. But I really do, because I think that the main characters have a lot of big character arcs, right? Big growth arcs, and a lot of places to go. And they explore really interesting terrain in terms of law enforcement, The Emily Ray series features this woman who's an FBI agent who heads she starts the series heading up the child abduction rapid deployment team, where she goes into abductions of kids. And she herself was a childhood kidnapping victim, so she has a certain thing she brings to that. And then she gets in the course of the book, she gets involved in other kinds of cases as well. But that's a character with very, very complex PTSD who has a lot of issues. And she's an interesting exploration, of a person who's out in the world functioning with that and doing their best to function with that. And the other one, the Cassidy Clarke series for Thomas and Mercer, same thing, a young woman on a very steep learning curve. So I feel like they could be television series. I think they'd be really good television series, really kind of interesting.
How do you feel auditioning now? Because it's not in person much anymore.
Yeah, what's hard about self-tapes, on one hand, they're very convenient, right? But what's hard about them is I'm the type of actor that I like to be in the room. I like to interact with the people in the room. I want them to have 5 minutes to talk to me first, to get a sense of my energy and my sense of their energy, right? And when you do the scene and you read the scene, there's a connection you have with people in the room, It helps fill up your performance when there are live people there responding, and even if they're filming it, they're on the other side of that. Self-tapes are very difficult. They're very dry. They're very, I find like I wouldn't know how, as a casting person, you get any sense of really who that actor is from a self-tape, right? But that's what it is now. So you just have to, you have to figure out, I'm still in the process of figuring out the best way to do it. I have all my lighting, I have all my stuff, but, you have to go, what's the best way to position myself for this job? And it's a process, and it's an adjustment. So I'm getting better at it, but it's I don't know. I feel like there's something so integral to the process that's lost when you don't see them in person, But I don't see that going back to live auditions anytime soon.
Well, see, it's good. I'm glad you have your books going, you have this, and I'm glad we got to talk. Now, I always ask my guests this. The last question I always ask. When you look back at your career, and this can be personal and it can be professional, it can be both, because I like it. What are you proud of? When you look back at your body of work and maybe your personal life, and I know you were going to say your son because you adopted him, but what are a few things that you're very proud of that you sit there and go, man, I've lived a good life?
I feel like a couple different things. Honestly, the most important thing to me really is that I made that decision to adopt my son, because my son was not in a circumstance where he was living with his birth family, and I adopted him from Guatemala. I didn't adopt him, through the private adoption in the U.S. or through foster care. I did it as an international adoption. My son went into the system in Guatemala immediately when he was born. He never spent any time with his birth mother. He bounced around from different foster homes. So my son's situation was not like his family. He lived with his birth family, and because of their economic circumstances, they had to put him up for adoption, and that's so traumatic, right? My son immediately went into the system because my son was born with a birth defect, with a cleft lip and a cleft palate. His birth mother could not take care of him. She didn't have the resources. She didn't have the means. They don't have national health care in Guatemala. There was no way she was going to be able to help him. So immediately he went into the system. And the fact that I got him out of the system, he would have probably lived in an orphanage all of his life and maybe had some shitty health care for his, my son has had 8 surgeries, right? He just finished the biggest one 6 months ago. He has a fabulous team of doctors at Children's Hospital. My son is such a great kid. He's so smart. He's going into electrical engineering. He's an incredibly smart kid and kind and sweet. And I know adoption can be a very controversial issue for a lot of people. People are a lot of people, especially international adoption, a lot of adoptees feel very upset about it because they feel like there's sort of this like American and European savior complex that people have. I don't have that. I don't think I do. I just feel like staying with his birth family was not an option. It was never going to be an option. His option was going to be living in an orphanage in Guatemala. And there was nothing that anybody could have done that would have kept him with his birth family. So getting him here to the United States, giving him an opportunity to go to college, giving him an opportunity to go to good school, to, have a stable upbringing, and with, for me, a parent who's like over the moon about, having him there, like thinking every single day, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. That's the thing I'm most proud of, because I feel like that was a really smart, sensitive child who might not have ever had the opportunity to pursue the things he loves to pursue. He plays the baritone saxophone. He's a gamer. He loves all those things, and he wouldn't have probably been able to do a lot of that. So I feel like I can die saying he has a good life, and he has a better life, And as an actress, there are a lot of disappointments I've had in my career as an actress. There are a lot of things I wanted to do. And every year that goes by that you get older, you realize I can't do that role. I can't do that role. But at the same time, I had the career that I had, and I still have it. And I'm old enough now to play a lot of the sort of hard-hitting older female roles I've always wanted to play. I kind of always wanted to play like the evil bitch matriarch. I always wanted to play Queen Margaret in the histories in Shakespeare. I always wanted to play those roles, and now I'm old enough to play them. So I feel like that's exciting, and this could be a really interesting period of my acting career that I wouldn't have foreseen, And I'm very proud of having gotten these book deals. I'm very proud of having sold these books to people and written them and gotten them out there, because I feel like that's kind of a big accomplishment, So I'm quite satisfied. Like, God forbid if I died tomorrow, I would be fine, I wouldn't say, like, I have so many regrets,
This has been awesome. I'm so glad we caught up. How can people find...
Thank you for asking me.
How can people find your books? How can they catch up? William, how can they find your books?
They can go to my website, which is michele-greene.com. And that's my general oversight website that has a lot of acting and books and everything. I have another website that is michelledominguezgreen.com, because that's my pen name. I use my grandmother's maiden name in my pen name. And that is all books. It's all books. It's got reviews. It's got links to everything. And then all my books are all available on Amazon. It's under, my name is Michele Dominguez Greene as an author. So if you look for me on Amazon, they're all going to come up.
So people go buy her books. Go check them out.
Yes, yeah.
People go to my website, coopertalk.net. You can find over 1,065 episodes. Also go onto YouTube. Look up for, I co-host a podcast with my lawyer friend, John Fagerholm. It's called Lawsuits and Lessons. Every 2 weeks we talk to entrepreneurs. Some are his friends from Texas and California. Some are my friends from New Jersey. We give some really good insights. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, we get some really great people in there, and that's on YouTube. Also, this coming Tuesday, it's May 19th. Tune into, if you're in the Philadelphia area, turn into Fox 11. I'll be the guest on Mike Jarrett's late night TV show. We'll be talking about me promoting the comedy show. I'm headlining a show on May 29th. It's a Friday night at Bricky's Comedy Club. It's a brand new place down there on Suite 10 in Sewell, New Jersey. So go check it out. You can also get in touch with me at coopertalk.net. Remember, I'm Steve Cooper. I'm only as hip as my guest. Don't forget, drink your water, eat your vegetables, take your vitamins, and I'll talk to you next time.